Brandon Smart didn't give his heart easily. He gave it to San Francisco, the city by the bay that Tony Bennett sang about. He gave it to the first love of his life, Paige, and then to the woman who became his wife, Alana. And that was it. But what else was there in life? The most beautiful and exciting city in the world and the most beautiful and exciting woman in the world. What could be better than that? Born in a modest rural town in New York State, he earned a good degree in computer science from MIT. During his freshman year, he lost his two sisters, parents, grandparents, and fiancée Paige in a fiery car accident when their large SUV was crushed and burned by a drunk driver towing a tanker of industrial alcohol. Grief-stricken, Brandon dove headfirst into his studies and used his evening job to paper over the cracks in his life. His family was fairly well off, so financially Brandon wasn't hurt. Though, of course, he was hurt in many other ways. He even blamed himself for the accident. After all, they were on their way to visit him if he hadn't left home for college. The therapy and counseling provided by the wonderful and dedicated staff at MIT Medical School's mental health and counseling services helped him so much that his pain went from a searing scream to a dull roar by the time he graduated from college, a year later than his classmates because he took a year off when he lost his family and the woman he was supposed to marry. He still felt a connection to Paige. He talked to her, asked her opinion on things, listened to her advice. It was as if he had a direct connection to the part of paradise she lived in. But despite the terrible loss of his entire family and future bride, Brandon got a very good master's degree and with it got a job at Google at the Googleplex in Mountain View, Santa Clara. Brandon loved California. Northern California, to be honest. Southern California was okay too, in his opinion, but he liked the San Francisco Bay Area better than Hollywood. Besides, the southern part of the state seemed too hot for his East Coast body. He met Mitch Clifton and his delightful wife Sandra, otherwise known as Sandy, when the Santa Clara Entrepreneurs Guild was holding an open house for Silicon Valley residents. They married while both were at Caltech, and right out of college, Mitch and Sandy started a computer and software company that was thriving. But now they needed a good systems engineer to help them take the business to the next level. Brandon applied to Google and within a month was already working at Advanced Synergies, a company that did contract work for many of Silicon Valley's key players. In his second month at Advanced Synergies, he was joined by Alana Baines. She was a gorgeous, blonde, well-built woman, and it was this, as well as her sharp mind, that caught Brandon's eye. Since Paige's death, he'd kept his heart under strict lock and key, but Alana had somehow managed to get around that, and pretty soon they were dating. After 6 months of courtship, they were married, with Mitch as best man and Sandy as mother of the bride. They bought a house 20 minutes away from Mitch and Sandy's house. Because Advanced Synergies could pay top dollar, the houses they bought were in the more affluent neighborhoods of Santa Clara. Things were going well, and Brandon and Alana talked about starting a family, but decided to hold off for a couple more years while continuing to take birth control injections. In addition to working with Mitch and Sandy at Advanced Synergies, Brandon and Alana socialized with them a lot. They vacationed together, hosted dinner parties, grilled kebabs at each other's homes, and spent alternate Christmases at one or the other's house. After 4 years of wedded bliss, that's what they called it, and after a session of raucous lovemaking while they were in a state of aftertaste, Alana looked up at Brandon and smiled nervously at him. "Honey, I have a question for you. A man I was talking to the other day mentioned the idea of swinging to me." She looked at him and said, "How do you even feel about the idea of swinging? About free marriage?" His answer was unequivocal. "I'm not interested in it, Alana. Not in the slightest degree. You're the only woman I want or need. If someone likes swingers, well, let them go with the flow. But I'm certainly not interested." If he had looked into her eyes at that moment, he would have seen a fleeting look of disappointment. A month later, Mitch decided to organize a meeting in the conference room of Advanced Synergies. The variety of food and drinks reminded Brandon of his job at Googleplex. Funny enough, Mitch rarely did things like this. Was this a new idea? He hoped so. Mitch gave a PowerPoint lecture about how, while things were going well, it was foolish to put all your eggs in one basket. Nearly 98% of their business came from collaborations with other Silicon Valley companies. He had a solution. A team of people would be created to find non-Silicon Valley companies that could take advantage of the unique skills that Advanced Synergies had to offer. It will be called the Advancement Team, as it will focus on promoting the business. In addition to his normal duties, Brandon will be promoted to director and will be responsible for leading this new team. Part of his duties will be to fly to the members of this team and offer them any support needed to promote Advanced Synergies services to potential clients. When he informed Alana of his news, she seemed to be even more excited than he was. She squealed like a little girl at Christmas. "Oh, Brandon, this is wonderful news. This is the kind of job that could mean great things for you. And for us. Will it involve traveling on business trips?" Such a sudden change of subject puzzled Brandon, but he decided that Alana didn't want to be separated from him. "I'm sorry, dear, but yes, we'll have to leave. If that doesn't suit you, I can refuse the promotion." She quickly replied, "Oh no, Brandon, you don't have to do that. I'll miss you when you're on business trips, of course, but just think of how we'll make up." They both laughed and chatted about how he could work in his new role. It took him a few weeks to figure out how to integrate his new role into what he still considered his primary role, and that of a sort of ambassador for the company. After his first year on the job, it seemed natural that he now often spent a couple nights a week away from Alana, his loving and caring wife. "My wife is very good about it," he told a coworker when he spent 2 nights in New York trying to get the business up and running. The coworker looked at him in surprise. "Really? My old lady would bring me eggs on a platter if I spent so many nights out of the house. You must have a very understanding wife." Brandon nodded and said, "That's for sure. And the makeup sex is pretty good, too." They laughed at his remark. 18 months after beginning work on the role, Brandon was scheduled to fly to Boston. He arrived at the airport for his morning flight when a text message arrived on his smartphone saying the meeting had been canceled because 2 of the 3 contestants were stuck in Europe. He decided he would take Alana out for a late lunch. When he tried to call her, he noticed the screen read "General Fail" on his phone screen. "Guess I'll have to give her a real surprise," he thought as he walked back to the airport parking lot to pick up his car. But the real surprise was Brandon. He parked the car, walked to the front door, opened it carefully and quietly, and closed it. Alana had a phobia about slamming doors, and she had so subtly ingrained it into Brandon's mind that it was second nature to him to close doors quietly. It was such a damn cliché. He heard sounds from upstairs, the sound of bed springs making sweet love music. Only there shouldn't be any love orchestra up there if there's only one person upstairs. Unless... He crept up the stairs, down to the landing, and saw his wife Alana having sex with his best friend Mitch. And she was clearly enjoying it, very much so. And it wasn't so much that she was physically cheating on him, which he was eventually able to tell his counselor about. It was the things she was saying while she was doing it that really devastated him and broke his heart. There was frantic pounding on the door of the house Sandy shared with Mitch. She hurried to the door, concerned and at the same time annoyed by the insistent noise. She opened the door and saw Brandon standing there. He appeared to be in shock. "What the hell are you doing here, Brandon? Aren't you supposed to be in Boston?" He looked up at her, and she noticed tears standing in his eyes. He spoke confusedly. "The meeting was canceled. My phone was dead, and I wanted to take Alana out to lunch. I came home and I saw Mitch and Alana. They were in our bed, having fun." And Sandy made a sound that sounded like something between a bark and a laugh. She felt like shouting, "Gee!" But then she noticed the lost, vacant look in his eyes, and she suddenly realized that her marriage was over. She took his hand gently and led him into the living room. She felt very angry. She wanted to rage against all the crap that was going on around her, which she now realized was obviously very different from the shit she thought was going on. But she knew she didn't have that option at the moment. Right now, she needed to focus all her energy and thoughts on helping her best and dearest friend cope with what he had just witnessed. She sat him down on the large couch and took the seat next to him. Brandon, if you want, you can talk to me. I'm your friend. I'll help you through this. He wrapped his arms around her and began to sob. Horrible, loud sobs that burst from the depths of a well of absolute misery. She put her arms around him, cradling him as one would cradle an upset baby. She stroked his head, making quiet sounds. It's okay, Brandon. It's okay. I'm here for you. Just cry it out, sweetie. He finally stopped crying and wiped his eyes with the box of tissues she gave him. I'm sorry I got so upset, but when I saw them, heard what they were saying, I just fainted. She nodded. Do they know you saw them? He shook his head. No, I was too cowardly. I ran away. That's not cowardice, Brandon, that's prudence. Anyway, what were they saying? They were mocking me, telling me what a fool I was for not realizing I was their cuckold. Sandy tensed and turned pale at this horrible revelation. Suddenly, Brandon was stunned and put his hand to his mouth. Oh my God, I slept with her after him. Sandy grabbed a metal wastebasket and pushed it in front of Brandon. He vomited several times and then choked on dry sobs. When his dry sobs subsided, Sandy realized that Brandon needed the truth. Brandon, I hope this doesn't make you think any worse of me, but Mitchell and I are swingers. In other words, we swap wives. Mitchell kind of talked me into it, and I tried it a few times, but I never enjoyed it as much as Mitchell did. One day, Mitchell said Alana wanted to talk. You must have been at work since you weren't there. They told me that Alana would like to deal with Mitchell by swapping partners, but that's not possible 100% because, although you like the idea of letting Alana have Mitchell, you don't want to switch. But you agree to let Alana and Mitchell play together. But the deal is that it's never to be discussed by any of us as a group. And I was never supposed to talk to him about it. Because while you didn't mind them having sex together, you didn't want anyone else, including me, to know what was going on. Now I'm guessing that you never agreed to anything like that, did you, Brandon? Damn, I feel like such a fool. Brandon nodded. That's right, Sandy. I never knew anything about it. I recall that shortly before I was promoted to the board and put in charge of the promotion group, Alana asked me if I had ever considered the swinger lifestyle. I replied that there was no way I would want to do that, since she was the only woman I wanted. And then, Sandy said bitterly, they decided to make it look like you agreed. But in doing so, they would have to have an affair in secret. Rotten, conniving bastards. Brandon nodded. I guess that's what happened. But there are worse things that happen. You know, we were thinking of having a baby? Anyway, they decided to go even further with that cuckold. They talked about how nice it would be if Mitchell got Alana pregnant, and then they'd pass the baby off as mine. They loved the idea of how stupid we would be. I would pay for the upkeep of Mitchell's baby, and you would be asked to sit with the baby and hold it in your arms, and you wouldn't know it was Mitchell's baby and not mine. Sandy looked at him. I thought they loved us. How could they do this to us? That's right. That solves everything. Those bastards are going to come here and answer for everything. She grabbed her cell phone from the coffee table in front of them and dialed Mitchell's number. Brandon could only hear one side of the conversation. She sounded angry and spoke in curt tones. Mitchell, I want you to come home immediately and bring Alana with you. Well, that's just too damn bad, honey. When I say immediately, I mean immediately. Well, just don't take that damn shower, you idiot. She cut the connection and smiled weakly at Brandon, saying, well, that should get them here. She shrugged and added, and if it doesn't, there are always lawyers to deal with them. 20 minutes later, they arrived with angry looks. The angry looks were replaced with concern, perhaps even fear, when they saw Brandon sitting on the couch. They exchanged glances, and Alana turned to Brandon with a concerned tone in her voice. Brandon, honey, why are you here? What's happened? Why are you so upset? Were you... cried? Brandon looked at her with a grim expression on his face. Before Brandon could say anything, Sandy jumped to her feet and got in her face. He knows, you pair of bastards! He knows everything! Her anger was so strong it was almost invisible. Alana staggered back a few steps and clung to Mitchell for support. This infuriated Sandy even more. This is it. Two cuckolds. Two bastards clinging to each other. Jesus, Sandy, what the hell did you say to him? Didn't I tell you he didn't want to know anything? Shouted Mitchell. Sandy screamed at him, speechless with rage. Then she said, "You stupid, selfish asshole! I didn't tell him! He's the one who told me!" "Oh, no!" Alana wailed. "How? Did you hire a private investigator, Brandon? I tried to be as secretive as possible. You weren't supposed to find out." Brandon looked at her intently. It was obvious to Sandy that he was in a state of shock. "No, you bloody bitch! He found out because his meeting in Boston was canceled. Then his phone died and he couldn't call you to let you know about the change of plans, so he was on his way home to take you to lunch. And then he found the two of you sleeping in his bed. And he didn't even realize until that moment that you had made him your cuckold. So how discreet was that, you stupid bitch?" "Gotcha." The expression on the faces of the two lovers spoke for itself. "We need to discuss this like calm, reasonable adults," Mitchell said, trying to regain control of the situation. "You can back right off," Sandy replied. "You cheated on both of us, so go to hell with your calm, rational crap." "Sandy," Mitchell said, "you're forgetting that we have an open marriage." "There's a difference between an open marriage and an open sewer, asshole. You screwed Alana for almost 2 years behind her husband's back. You both lied to me. You told me Brandon didn't mind you sleeping with her, but that was a lie. You lied to me. You cheated on me and him. Shame on you both." They stood, both deceivers, like deer in headlights, not knowing what to do or what to say. Eventually, Alana pulled away from Mitchell, realizing that if she had any chance of saving her marriage, clinging to her lover in front of her husband probably wouldn't help. She sat down in the upholstered chair so she could look directly at her husband from across the coffee table. Mitchell continued to stand. "Brandon, honey, what did you see? What did you hear?" She knew she and Mitchell had talked, but at that moment she couldn't remember exactly what it was about. He looked at her. The dim look in his eyes startled her. She suddenly felt uneasy about what she had done to her husband, though she admitted to herself that it was too late for any feelings of worry, guilt, or remorse. "I've heard you say you like a cuckold, how you're going to have his baby and make me think it's mine, how you're going to deceive both me and Sandy, how you're going to enjoy watching me and the baby, knowing that Mitchell became the father and not me." Alana dropped her head into her arms and burst into tears. "Too late for tears, bitch!" Sandy shouted, getting angry again. Mitchell was still standing, his look depressed. He turned to Sandy. "Sandy, I'm really sorry. It's not as bad as it seems. Can we forget it? Please? Get it over with? Oh, come on." They were interrupted by Brandon's sudden burst of agony. "Oh my God, Paige, I'm so sorry. Paige, I thought you were there for me. I thought you told me that I could marry Alana and that she would love me as much as you do. But she doesn't. She doesn't love me at all. I used to talk to you every day, Paige, tell you how my day was going. You'd talk back. Tell me something to cheer me up when I was down, or tell me off when I needed a kick. But now that Alana and Mitchell have slept together, become lovers, now I know the truth, Paige. You don't exist. You're really dead. And there is no afterlife. All my talking to you is just my imagination running wild." Staggering to his feet, he rose to his feet, looked at Alana, and shook his fists in front of her. "It's you. It's your fault. I know now that my Paige is dead and gone forever, that I'll never see her again." He collapsed to the floor and sobbed. Everyone looked at each other, horrified at what they saw. Alana had always thought in the back of her mind about how Brandon would react if he found out about her cheating. But in her mind she saw a few tears, a few angry words, and a lot of sex. What she hadn't counted on was that he would take it so hard. She had completely and utterly destroyed him. She rushed to him to comfort him, but he visibly recoiled from her. Sandy walked a few steps toward him and sat on the floor, wrapping her arms around him. She looked at Alana and shook her head. "You're a fucking bitch. I hate you for what you did to Brandon." Alana shook her head. "But it wasn't supposed to be like that. It wasn't anything like this. I never wanted Brandon to get hurt. Not this much. I kind of guessed he'd be upset when he found out about me and Mitchell. But I never thought it would be this bad for him." Sandy looked at her. "You really don't get it, do you? You destroyed your poor, beautiful husband. Everything he thought he knew was taken from him by you. The only man in this world he thought he could rely on. Then she turned to Mitchell. And as for you, Mitchell, I feel nothing but contempt for you. A director-level job that involved so much traveling, days and nights away from home, away from your wife. That was a phony job, wasn't it? You made it up just so you could have unfettered access to that whore, didn't you? Mitchell nodded. Yes, but if anything, it ended well and he did a great job for the company. Sandy snorted derisively. Well, isn't that wonderful? You're making me sick. I don't know how Brandon feels about it, but I'm going to divorce you. Brandon, honey? What about you? Do you think you have a future in marriage with Alana? He shook his head. I doubt there's any future for me. But I'll tell you what. That damn woman doesn't figure in my future. Alana sobbed, realizing that she had just lost everything she had dreamed of. Sandy was worried about Brandon and took him to the hospital. The ER doctor on duty confirmed that he appeared to be having a nervous breakdown. He transferred him to the psychiatric ward where he was monitored by staff. Alana enrolled him in the hospital using the company's insurance plan. She visited him every day, and within 2 weeks he began to respond to treatment. Why didn't Alana visit me? He asked her. Sandy shook her head. I don't know. I think she feels guilty about what she did. By the way, I kicked Mitchell out. I think he's living with Alana at your house. I think they're still seeing each other. Look, the doctors think you'll be ready to leave the hospital soon. You'll need a place to stay. Would you consider it rude if I asked you to stay with me? He smiled and shook his head. Not an imposition, but rather a nice gesture to help out a friend. If you thought I couldn't stand living with Alana, well, Sandy, you're right. After the humiliation she subjected me to, I couldn't bear the thought of being with her. In fact, those few weeks in the hospital gave me time to think about a lot of things. One part of me wants to go back to her, to try to continue our marriage. But is that realistic? Chief Rabbi has a better chance of being Pope. Sandy looked at him. Are you thinking about divorce? I'm thinking about it too. I can't bear to think about how Mitchell tricked and coaxed me into helping him fulfill his fantasies of sex by becoming a swinger. The mere fact that I'd have to get tested for STDs, what's the use? Let's face it, Brandon, those two lousy, low, good-for-nothing bastards were never good enough for us. I just thank God we found out what they were really like before the kids were born. Brandon nodded and paused briefly before answering. Yes, Sandy, you're right. We are worth more than they are. And you're right about the kids. I wouldn't want a pair of jackals like Mitchell and Alana to have kids. He shuddered at the thought. And as for your other point, yes, divorce is the only option I can realistically go through. If I spend any time with her, I'll just get confused. Why don't we use the same lawyer? The divorce went through the legal process. Since California is a no-fault state, adultery was not actually grounds for divorce, but in truth, the facts of adultery would have affected the outcome of the divorce. At the couple's insistence, the judge ordered both couples to undergo counseling to see if reconciliation was a possibility. Dr. David Moore was not an MD. He was a PhD in psychology and had a master's degree in marriage counseling. He addressed both couples. My name is Dr. David Moore, and I'm a court-appointed marriage counselor. If I believe either party has a chance at reconciliation, then I will recommend further counseling. If not, then I will recommend to the judge that further counseling will be futile and may even cause you further distress and heartache. He sat them down in a room that was usually used for group staff meetings, as he had never had to counsel such a large group of spouses at the same time. He let them choose where to sit themselves. It would help him determine how to proceed. Interesting. Each spouse sat with the other's partner. This told him about the dynamics of the group, and even at this early stage, there was no hope of reconciliation. Okay, why don't you tell me what happened? He asked the group. They started all at once, so Dr. Moore raised his hand and said in a commanding voice, "Not all at once, please!" He looked at them, and his gaze fell on Sandy. "Sandy, why don't you start?" As he listened to her story, he began to feel irritation at Mitchell and Alana. But he was too much of a seasoned professional to let it show in his demeanor. When she finished her tale of open marriages, betrayal, and cuckolds, he realized that a bleak future awaited their marriages. Even if they agreed to stay married, he knew they would be separated in a few years. So, Does everyone else agree with Sandy's version of events? Please don't speak yet, just nod. He noticed that Brandon's nods were empathic, while Mitchell and Alana's nods were weak and rather blank. So, let's see. Let me ask you a question, Alana. Why should your husband stay married to you? Alana raised her head. The question caught her off guard with its bluntness. She raised her eyes to Dr. Moore, trying to focus on him. Why? Because he loves me and I love him. You have an almost unique way of expressing that love for him. You get a lover. You help your lover arrange for your husband to go out of town at least once a week, so you can have as much sex as you want with your lover, your best friend's husband. You turn your husband into a cuckold. You plan for your lover to get you pregnant, but you also want to trick your husband into believing that your lover's illegitimate child is your poor husband's child and to raise him as your own child. Is there anything else I'm missing? Alana sobbed, wiping her eyes with tissues that were in a box placed in front of her chair on a small table. You see, Alana, I believe very much in reconciliation in marriage, very much believe in it. But in some cases, things are just too bad to fix. That's not for me to decide, though. Who here believes their marriage can be saved? Just raise your hands. Mitchell and Alana raised their hands, but Sandy and Brandon kept their hands at their sides, as if afraid of accidentally tensing muscles that might be misinterpreted as a vote in favor. Dr. Moore shook his head. That voice tells me all I need to know. Faithful, committed spouses don't think their marriage can be saved, but cheating spouses think it can. This is because many cheating spouses live in denial and refuse to recognize the harm they have done. But it can't be over. We have to make up, Mitchell shouted. If we divorce, our business will be sold and I'll only get half. Oh, shit, Sandy exclaimed. Is that why you keep trying to block the divorce? To keep your precious business? Look, damn it, I worked as hard as you did to get Applied Synergy up and running. It was just a dream at first, but we built the damn thing to what it is now. If you didn't want this to happen, why did you decide to take Alana as your mistress? The argument went on for a while longer. They were starting to give Dr. Moore a headache. While they argued in his office, he filed his report with the court, summarizing succinctly why he felt both marriages were broken beyond repair, and why, in his professional opinion, further marriage counseling would not be beneficial. He hit the send button on his email and then stood up, clapping his hands to get their attention. Okay, he exclaimed, that's enough. You really have no hope of saving your marriages because none of your cheating spouses want to save it. Why should they, anyway? You cheated on them, and the consequences are that they no longer love you, or as I suspect they still love you, but their love is not enough to overcome the pain of your betrayal and your lies. They stood up and left his office. The two betrayed and the two betrayed seemed to split into pairs. I wonder, Dr. Moore pondered to himself, maybe something good will come out of this mess after all. A month later, the divorces were finalized. The company was sold at a good price. It's not often that Silicon Valley companies like Applied Synergies hit the market. It wasn't Google or Yahoo, but it was a pretty big and tempting target. After all, there was still money to be invested in the right project. They asked their attorneys to do a house swap so that each of the devoted spouses could have their own home. Mitchell and Alana lived together but did not marry, while Sandy and Brandon married. Mitchell and Alana did not receive an invitation to the wedding, but on the day of the wedding, Alana cried. She realized that she had lost something and someone who was very important to her. After all, Mitchell Clifton was a good man, but he certainly wasn't Brandon Smart.